the lucky people. The lucky people that made it to a Wednesday, the first ever Wednesday Penny Stamps Distinguished Speaker Series. Yes, I'm Christina Hamilton, the series director. Absolutely thrilled to the bejesus today to finally present fine art photographer and native Midwesterner, Catherine Opie. I say finally, as we had hoped to host this talk a couple of years ago. Many of you will remember the University of Michigan Museum of Art down the road hosted the exhibition 700 Neames Road, an indirect portrait of Elizabeth Taylor a couple of years ago. And Opie, being such a prolific and busy artist, which makes us very happy indeed, was unable to make a date with us during the exhibition. So here we are today, finally, bringing you the artist in her own words. A big thank you to our partners today for their support. A first ever CCS Woodward Lecture Series, that is College for Creative Studies in downtown Detroit. This is the first time we've been able to partner with them, which is fantastic. And this is a co-presentation with the Woodward Lecture Series, so I should say welcome to the Woodward Lecture Series as well. Another partner or supporter today, the University of Michigan Museum of Art and Michigan Radio 91.7 FM. A special welcome to CCS folks in our midst. It's a distinct pleasure for us to have you here. I know you've probably never been able to make it to one of these before because you guys have stuff going on downtown usually. And usually we're competing against each other. A shout out to Michelle Perrin, the director of the series, and thanks for being such a terrific colleague. Now that you've made it here, I hope that you'll make it to more things, so do grab a calendar on your way out. Usually we're here on Thursdays. Tomorrow we'll have our regular Thursday program presenting Emory Douglas, graphic designer and First Minister of Culture for the Black Panther Party, at our regular time at 5:10 p.m. We will have a Q&A today directly following the presentation here on stage today. You'll notice there's a microphone at the end of this aisle, there's a microphone at the end of that aisle. So when we come to the Q&A interactive part of this event, please join up or line up at either microphone with your question. There are books for sale in the lobby from Nicola's Books. And please do remember to silence your cell phones. And now for a proper introduction of our guest, an artist who makes very important work herself, a professor of photography, film and video, and women's studies here at the Stamp School. She also serves as the director of Michigan Women's Justice and Clemency Project. Please welcome Carol Jacobson.
Thanks, Christina. I am very honored to introduce my friend and colleague, Catherine Opie. She's a major American photographer whose work exudes bravery through her creative artistry, lush color, loving sensibility, and calm confrontation. Catherine Opie received her first camera on her 9th birthday, and she's been documenting her friends, her community, and urban imagery beyond ever since. Her portraits of friends in the Leather Dyke community and her self-portraits, including those titled Dyke, Cutting, Pervert, and Nursing, have become classics for their bold and powerfully moving presence. She's also focused her camera on many significant moments across the American social and cultural landscape. Since earning a BFA from the San Francisco Art Institute and MFA from California Institute of the Arts, Catherine Opie has had a long list of exhibitions in museums, both nationally and internationally. A few of her solo shows include the Museum of Contemporary Art in LA, the Photographers Gallery London, the ICA Boston, and the Guggenheim in New York and Spain. She's also been included in major exhibitions such as the Whitney Biennial, the Pompidou in Paris, the Getty in LA, the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. She's taught at Yale and is a professor of photography at UCLA. We are all thrilled to have Cathy Opie here. Please join me in a welcome to our guest artist, photographer, Catherine Opie.
Hello, everybody. It's amazing to be here, and I really appreciate you guys coming out on a Wednesday. It's true I couldn't do a Thursday, so not because I'm against Thursdays. It just was. Just didn't work in my schedule. So it's fantastic to be here tonight. I'm as it was said, I'm from the Midwest, so I grew up in Sandusky, Ohio, which many of you know from Cedar Point Amusement Park. There's no other reason to know Sandusky except for Cedar Point Amusement Park, apparently. As everybody always says, oh, you're from Sandusky, Cedar Point. Yeah. But anyway, we'll go to the first image, which is actually the first self-portrait at age 9. And so you can already see that I'm practicing my badass baby dyke look with unzipped flowered pants and major muscles. And I mean, it is kind of interesting because I really did tell my parents at the age of 9 that I wanted to be a social documentary photographer and asked for a camera. And so this is literally one of the first images on the first roll of film, which is a self-portrait. And I think it's always kind of fascinating how your life mirrors your early ambition to a certain extent. And so I always show this because I do feel like it is something that I always come back to in a certain way within the work. But I'm not going to keep you at my 9-year-old self. I will move you forward to 1989. And 1989 was a year in which after making many, many bodies of work and being in San Francisco at the Art Institute, I was studying with Hank Wessel, who just passed away, and Larry Salton, and a number of other amazing professors. And I was primarily a black and white street photographer, and I was like really trained in that kind of MoMA Zarkowski school of photography. And after I got my degree, in my master's degree at CalArts, and having been making work on master plan communities and again defining ideas of community and society, I ended up making this series of my friends with mustaches and beards on with their nicknames underneath, so calling it Being and Having. And this is myself, actually, but it's not a self-portrait, it's Bo. And Bo was my alter ego, who obviously was from Sandusky, Ohio. But his persona sold used aluminum siding. He didn't even sell new aluminum siding. He only sold used. So you can imagine how pathetic Bo really was. But it came out of like my friends and I in LA, and I had lived in San Francisco for so many years, and the community there was just this amazing, vast community that I was a part of. And then I moved to LA, and I felt like, where am I living? Like, where are my people? And so my people began to be this group of women that we'd go to the only lesbian bar in LA, and we'd ride our motorcycles, and we'd put on fake mustaches, and we would offer girls rides home. And they just, of course, never really took us up on it. But we thought we were cool. And then it made me think about the idea of the gays, and obviously Judith Butler was writing about it at this period of time, and so we were I was mirroring a little bit visually what she was writing about, even though I wasn't really reading Butler at this point in time. And so this is Chicken. So the outward look of my friends with fake mustaches on and shooting it with a 4x5 camera was really interesting, because you can obviously see their facial hair and the webbing of the mustache because of the detail of large format images. But I would show them in museums, and I would have like literally people who worked at museums as interns walk up to me and say like, oh, I think I know some of the guys in your photographs. And I'm like, they're all lesbians with fake mustaches. And then it was just like, oh, okay. And they kind of slink away from me like, oh dear. And so this is Chief. And one of the things that happened was I got out of the street, so to speak. And so I started to really think about the studio and the aspect of ideas around identity and how identity is constructed. And I would say that all the various bodies of work that you will see today, which is a massive amount of images actually, This is Jake, and really deal with the specificity of identity in relationship to not only my own identity as far as being being queer and a dyke, but also the relationship to American culture and how we begin to look at it and how we unpack it. And so the work traverses literally this relationship to both landscape and the body, and that I have really focused on that throughout the various bodies of work. This is Papa Bear. And so then after doing Being and Having, I wanted to stay in the studio. And I was working in, I think at this point, my Silver Lake apartment that I could clear out the living room and have it as a studio. And I would also go up to San Francisco for a month every August. And I did this for 3 years in a row where people would loan me their studios. And I think that it was really the relationship of activism in terms of how devastated and affected I was in relationship to AIDS in my community and how many friends that I lost through AIDS, and realizing what it was to make very humble, dignified portraits of my friends, in which at this point in time, besides having Mapplethorpe as an example, there weren't an enormous amount of examples in relationship to creating a history of community as I was suffering great amounts of loss within my own community. So again, using a large format 4x5 camera, I just started making these portraits and spent about 5 years doing it. This is the incredible performance artist Justin Bond. Mike and Sky. Crystal. And at this point in time, a lot of what you saw within the community, and I definitely photographed for On Our Backs magazine in the 80s and kind of was doing that specific work, but it was always about this kind of performance of queerness in a way, and it felt to me that it was often fractured within body parts. And so I really wanted to use kind of the history of portraiture. And so the person that I was looking at this point in making this body of work was Holbein. So I was really thinking about Holbein and the way that he held the gaze. This is Diane DeMassa. Angela. Alistair. And I wanted the portraits to be kind of in a position in relationship to using color and allowing color to fulfill it, because I didn't want to make black and white photographs of my friends in their homes. I felt like I wanted to also really begin a dialogue in relationship to documentary and the practice of documentary and photography. And so in a certain way, like, do these tropes of painting negate documentary and begin to like really open up how we begin to think about a documentary practice, so to speak. This is Pigpen. You'll see Pigpen later. I just made a new body of work with Piggy, and I've been photographing him for over 20 years now. Chloe. Frankie. The other thing that, is really important within this body of work with the kind of incredible crisis of AIDS and how it affected me is that photography always serves to a certain extent of memory, but it also creates history. So how do we create a visual history in relationship to queer culture? And then a number of my friends, obviously, I photographed, and they are no longer with us. So what that does in terms of holding them within the community. This is Idexa. James. And then these are actually printed 30 by 60 inches, and I did all my own printing for years. I no longer work in the darkroom like most of us, but I did do an enormous amount of darkroom work. So these are all 30 by 60 inches, and they are more performative, I would say. So, but they did go with the portrait series. So this is, again, Beau, Ron Athey, Vaginal Cream Davis, Divinity Fudge, and then the portraits, this is Dyke, my friend Stake tattooed Dyke on the back of her neck, and I thought it was like one of the, and this is 1992, and it's the first time that I'm using the fabric backgrounds, and so I'm really again thinking about that kind of history painting in relationship to it, but what does it mean to wear one's identity on the body at this point in time? So in 1992, I felt like this was a completely radical gesture for my friend to tattoo Dyke on the back of her neck. And then following it with fabric is self-portraits, and the first self-portrait was self-portrait cutting. And it was actually after my one and only domestic relationship at that point in time in my life broke up, and I was so depressed that I kept like drawing this for a year on a pad, doodles, as I was on the phone, and realized that there was an incredible important meaning in it and what blood signified at this period of time in 1993 in my community, as well as identity, and what children draw in kindergarten when they're asked to represent their families. So all of this was beginning to circle in my mind, and so this was the first self-portrait that I did in relationship to a cutting. The second one was the year later, and I would say that it's a little bit more intense of a piece than the first one, and it's Pervert. And I made this actually more in relationship to the kind of, I made it after the March on Washington for gay and lesbian rights, and there was a moment in which the leather community were othered, where there was this kind of movement for family values within the gay and lesbian community, and there was this kind of like, oh no, while they're perverts, we're not like them, from my own community. And I was thinking about, again, Holbein and Henry VIII and kind of what it meant to be royalty to a certain extent, and so I made this self-portrait Pervert. And the first place this self-portrait ever showed was actually in 1995 at the Whitney Biennial. And it was a really kind of intense experience to be making this work within my own community, but not really a fully exhibiting artist at this point in time. And then to have this begin to represent me. And so I had all these people always coming up to me saying, asking me for an interview, and then I would give them an interview, and they would be like, oh man, I was so scared to meet you, but you're like really nice. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. So it was interesting to see how making a really powerful piece in relationship to your own identity ended up also signifying all these other things to people who were wanting to interview me and talk to me. Following it, after I had my son, this was made in 2003. Oliver was born in 2002. And so this is self-portrait nursing. And again, that kind of art historical trope of Madonna and child, but it's a 40-year-old lesbian, you know, with pervert carved on her chest still. So it's another way to begin to think about the way that our relationship of history to the queer body, to parenting, all of that is embedded, you know, very deeply within my practice. He's going to be 17 in February, so he's very big now. This is an installation shot from the Guggenheim, and believe it or not, that survey show was 10 years ago now to this date, basically. Was it opened in 2008, 10 years ago? It's kind of hard to believe that a decade has already gone by since that show. But for the first time ever, those images hung together. So after all of this, and kind of being put in all of these shows, like, is it a boy or is it a girl? Like really lame titles for exhibitions in relationship to gender. And kind of being positioned as the leather kind of dyke photographer, I realized that I needed to go back to a place that also was important to me. And so I started making these platinum prints of LA freeways. And I mainly shot them all on Sundays. They're all emptied. They're about the freeways as monuments, as architecture, using platinum printing. And they're just these forms. And so there are these very small prints, and it was actually, I think that it's, I talk a lot in different interviews and different moments in my life of what a pause means, but also the aspect of not being a singular identity. So the freeways allowed me to, I was also commuting 5 days a week from Los Angeles to Irvine, where I was the lab tech and building the darkroom down there. So it allowed me these kind of moments of thinking about California landscape, and it's something that I had always been attached to because my thesis work at Cal Arts was on master planned communities. And so it was always really important that I have two practices or two aspects of my practice continuing in relationship to being an artist, that I didn't want to be kind of just one identity that was known within within the artist community. And these are my pause, just these pauses. Then the houses came about because I started going to collectors' houses in Beverly Hills and Bel Air, and I lived in Koreatown. I didn't really think that much about Beverly Hills and Bel Air. And then I was really, I had this 90210 kind of image of Beverly Hills. And then I started roaming that area, and I became really fascinated with this idea of this architecture that also mirrored a borrowed history. And then I started thinking about my friends in terms of the leather community and the accumulation of tattooing and piercing and this relationship to kind of tribal culture and what that meant. And that these houses were also in a certain way a facade that was in relationship to identity. And so they, have these bizarre Pullman doors, and this is when I switched from 4x5 as large format to 8x10. So I just started shooting 810. And so there are all these just like really houses that you actually don't think of in terms of Beverly Hills and Bel Air, but that I really love their uniqueness. So many of them now are ripped down. It's really a shame. These mega mansions going up everywhere. Where this one, it's like as if it is a Hollywood facade. The hillside is just growing out of the back of it as if there's no house there. So after the houses, I'm always thinking about that relationship of what's inside and outside. What is political, what is personal, these binaries that I'm constantly exploring. So after doing these facades of these houses, I bought an RV and I decided to travel around America for 3.5 months and photograph lesbian domestics in terms of friends and households to live together. And it was also really important because I made it on the heels of Peter Glass's show at MoMA of Pleasure and Danger and Domestic Terror. And there was no kind of queer representation at that point. And Tina Barney had just put out Theater of Manners. And so I was really thinking about what that is to shoot 810 and what it is to kind of create these images. And so domestic to me was this ability to begin to, again, kind of refocus on that dream of mine of the two stick figure girls on my back, but that I would end up, potentially having an old domestic relationship. When I started this series, it wasn't going too well. And I had dear, dear friends who'd been together for years, and I kind of modeled my own longing of a relationship based on theirs. And 3 friends in a row who had long-term relationships broke up soon after I made the photograph. Then I was like, I think I need to buy an RV and go to other people. Like my friends were like, whoa, what did you do to us? So this is Miggy and Eileen in LA. This is Tammy, Ray, and Kaya in North Carolina. This is Kellen and Juliet in New York. Olivia, Betsy, and Joanne in Bayside, New York. Christopher and Clara in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And there's all these wonderful signifiers in this. I mean, it's just the big barbecue and the big satellite dish. So the other thing is always the relationship to not only the interior of the home, but also what landscape and how landscape begins to connote these different ideas of where you are. And it's something that I've explored in multiple bodies of work as well. So this is Emily, STS, and Becky, and this is in North Carolina. So I would pull up and I would basically have a friend that maybe I knew, because I didn't really want to stay in the RV parks because they kind of freaked me out. And so I plugged into their wall socket, but I would live in my RV, and then I would go to the local bar, and I would announce that I'm here to make photographs, and would anybody like to sit for me. But this is actually my old front lawn in California, in Koreatown, where my apartment was. And this is actually a lesbian breakup garage sale. So, and this is Melissa and Lake in North Carolina. And this is Flipper, Tanya, Chloe, and Harriet in San Francisco. And this is always I decided I wanted to ground the portraits to a certain extent in a language of the genres of photography. So I included with it still lives from different homes. And so whenever I lecture, I always say this is a lesbian washer and dryer. And undoubtedly I get laughter, and then I have usually a Q&A. Like there was a moment in the South where at Q&A somebody said, "Excuse me, what is a lesbian washer and dryer?" And I said, well, this is the thing, is I'm really fighting homophobia, and our washer and dryer is exactly the same as your washer and dryer, and that's the whole point of it. And so she got it. But she really thought that maybe we had different magical washer and dryer, and maybe she needed to know about, that went beyond the Tide Pod use and so forth. So then in 2001, and I'm skipping multiple bodies of work, so in between this, because it would be an incredibly long lecture, in between this time period of freeways would be a whole body of work called American Cities that were shot with a 7x17-inch banquet camera, and that had to do with the specificity of identity in relationship to different American cities and iconic American cities. And ice houses were part of it, but I also made these 717 images of skyways all through Minnesota. But I also went out in the winter and I made these ice house photographs. In Ohio, we call them ice shanties. But in the way that I don't call strip malls, I call them mini malls, and I call these ice houses, is because I want to take away these other kind of connotations of meaning and in relationship to how we name things or what things are called. And so, these are all through Minnesota, and I ended up photographing them, obviously vertical and horizontal. I'm on during blizzards with an 8x10 camera, and I decided that I liked the white on white, that I wanted this kind of almost Ryman moment in relationship to painting, but I wanted the horizon line in the middle. So when all of them hang together, the horizon line lines up. So it's a fractured panorama. And I'm always interested in ideas of fractured landscape, or how do we create images that allow you to change the language of how we think about, again, photography and photography as a document. And so I'm always wanting people to move through the landscape or connect the landscape in a certain way. So it was very cold. I got stuck on the ice multiple times. It was embarrassing, but it was a phenomenal body of work which continued this long kind of view of horizon line for me and multiple other bodies of work. I like the notion of temporary communities. I like the idea that you can pull your ice house out on the ice for 3 months usually, depending, with global warming, it's going to be a lot less. And that you can decide if you don't like the guy next to you, you can just have a sled and pull it to another part of the lake. So I like that idea of how community is formed. So you can see they begin to get more abstract as I face the blizzards outside. Then in 2003, I was making the ice houses, and I was teaching at Yale. I was offered a position at UCLA and got to go back home. And I was also thinking about, I surfed all through high school, and I was thinking about, that the surfing is also a temporary community. That you're down there, you're waiting for these sets of waves, and that you can be next to all these different people that you end up having conversations with. And so going out on July, like as we call it June gloom, but it's also July. It's June and July, but June gloom sounds better than July gloom. It would be these surfers just waiting for the next set of waves. And it's another thing that I do a lot within my work is what is the relationship to ideas of what is iconic within photography. Like if we think of the migrant mother as kind of being the moment that describes the Great Depression through the lens of Dorothea Lange, what is the relationship to surfing as sports photography? And so this idea of waiting is another way for me to have this meditative moment, as well as just kind of capitulate the relationship of landscape that's not necessarily about the action that's happening within the landscape. And so there's 14 images in the ice houses, and there's 14 images within the surfer body of work. And they also go to being more abstract in relationship to fog. And so all 14 of these images were installed in the Guggenheim across from one another at the same time. And so that you moved through this space, and there just happened to be 14 slots in the ceiling as well. So I was very grateful they designed this kind of perfect room that I'll never be able to go in again, kind of my Rothko chapel, so to speak. And it was a kind of pretty amazing experience to see these finally across from one another. So again, like the same way within domestic that I wanted to ground it in a language of still life, I felt that the surfers in the ice houses were too pretty. I was a little worried about that. I was like, yeah, they're really pretty, you know? And now I've gotten over it. It's like I'm totally cool with making pretty photographs. But at first I was like, are they too pretty? And I mean, I always have used beauty as a trope, so to speak. But there was always an edge to it, and there wasn't really an edge. So I began again to think about surfer magazines and how surfers are portrayed. And so I went out and I made these portraits with a 4x5 camera. And I asked people just as they were coming out of the water if they would stand for me, and I'd make a portrait. The other reason I started making these portraits is somebody had pointed out to me that all my landscapes are empty, and the only people that I photograph are queers from my own community. And they thought that maybe I was doing this on purpose, that I was only going to populate the world with queers. And I realized, like, I don't really want that to be a conversation piece, and I want to make other portraits. And I felt confident enough because I had been doing a lot of editorial work for the New York Times Magazine and all other magazines to kind of go out and make portraits of people that I didn't know. So this is Matt, Larky, Margaret, this is Nick, and so now we're going to In and Around Home. So the body of work, again, that you would see before this would be a body of work called 1999. So I made this body of work called 1999, which you're not going to see, but I feel like I need to preference that work in relationship to why I made that work, which was basically me driving from New York to California in December of 1999, right before 2000, where you might remember what I call a quaint fear in American culture at that point was Y2K, that we were going to lose all of our information, right? It was why I call it as a quaint fear, because this is now post 9/11 that I'm making this body of work on the re-election of Bush. And so 1999 was this kind of exploration and riffing on the history of Walker Evans, Robert Frank, Dorothea Lange, like what it is to make the great American road trip and make images in relationship to the idea that we're going to go into potentially disinformation. And so it has a lot to do with just hand-painted signs, like what we would call Americana work. And I've always been like kind of in love with Americana. And so the in and around home is, again, during the election or re-election of George W. Bush. 9/11 has happened. We are now no longer doing road trips. We're building home theaters. There's this like new massive fear in relationship to American culture. And so I just decided to photograph inside my home and around my home, thus the title In and Around Home. And so this is Oliver really basically ignoring his breakfast and talking to the dogs on a Sunday morning. This is Monica Lewinsky mural in a blue dress on Western Avenue. And then with this body of work, I also was doing SX70 Polaroids off the TV, because at this point digital photography and photoshopping had come in. So what was it to kind of take photographs off the television in a Polaroid format? And so this is the character on Days of Our Lives, Philip, who goes off to war. And then we have Bush thumbs up. And then Judge Dykes, and you know, she came on late night TV. How can you not take a photograph of Judge Dykes, right? So we have a brunette news reporter. We have abandoned TV. We have my daughter Sarah with her dog Momo. Myself with my dog Nika, who passed away 3 days after this photograph, and I knew after 16 years with this dog, I had to put her in and around home. Martin Luther King Parade. Self-portrait voting. USC tailgate party. So where I lived in South Central, USC was our neighbors. So you have this like very powerful, wealthy university in the middle of South Central. And it was very interesting in relationship to how that transformed or changed the landscape of that neighborhood. Oliver in a pink tutu doing laundry with a lesbian washer and dryer. We have the flag that hung in front of my house for 8 years. We the people say no to the Bush agenda, but then this Christmas tree lights in the foreground, but it's a pretty bleak idea of Christmas, I think. This is titled Debate. This is titled Talking to the Bush. Stolen Converses, where this young girl stole the pair of red Converses that she's wearing, and she's holding the box, and the LAPD are on the corner discussing with her parents what should be done with her. This is titled Bush Smiles, Help Us. Neighborhood ice cream truck. LAPD. And then it ends on optimism. And again, this isn't all of the images in the body of work, but it ends, instead of on an LAPD helicopter, which was always a presence over my home, it ends on a rainbow kite. Because it's important to be optimistic, especially right now. Somehow, help us. So high school football, you know, kind of a strange body of work for me to begin and think about and to do. And so many people have asked me different questions about it. They're like, well, are you having a conversation with Collier Shore's wrestlers? And I'm like, no, I'm not actually. I actually was really, it all started out really with having to go home for 10 days in August to my wife's family's home in Louisiana in a small town called Church Point. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I have like 25 nieces and nephews there, so I asked my nephews if I could start going to their high school football practices because I just needed to do something. And then it really ended up moving me, and I began to think about these young men in relationship to being in war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and how high school football is just this kind of feeder in a certain way for military, and also the idea of American landscape and the history of American genre painting all got kind of thrown in this exploration of this body of work. And so with high school football, they're really about landscapes. And They also, like domestic, they traverse the country. So this is Ohio. No, I'm sorry, this is 29 Palms, where its big marine base is. And 65% of the members of the team, both parents were deployed to Afghanistan or Iraq. 65% of these young men had both parents deployed. This is Texas. Again, 29 Palms. And this is where I went digital. So for those people out there who always ask camera questions, I knew that I couldn't make this body of work with an 8x10 camera, and I had won an award, and so I used that award to buy a really good digital camera. So this is in Ohio, actually. This is in Columbus, and this is David, Austin, and Bryant. And the high school that they went to, they were the only African-American students in the high school, which was predominantly a Jewish high school, private school. And so it was really important when I did their portrait that they were portrayed together. And this is Andrew. This is in Louisiana. Seth. Brock. This is also in Louisiana. This is my old high school that I went to in Southern California, Poway High, and this is Robbie. This is Gino. This is Leon. So in making this body of work, I got very attached to not necessarily thinking about how high school football represented ideas of masculinity, which is what Collier Shore was really exploring within her work, but actually kind of the vulnerability of these young men. And, you know, unfortunately, sure enough, what I did, it was really interesting how to make this body of work, right? Because my Wikipedia page, when you went up to it, immediately when you researched me, pervert came up. And I was like, oh shit, how am I gonna do this? How am I gonna get the parents' consent for me to use these portraits, right? And so I had a wiki war where I tried to change my Wikipedia page, but it didn't go well. Somebody really was dedicated to it being really, having pervert come up first, even though I had made all this other work. So then there was a warning on my wiki page that I was, you know, changing the content. But so I sent portraits back to the coaches, like in those 8x10 portraits of every player with a model release form for their parents to sign. And so I only used the portraits that I was able to use with parents' consent because they were minors. And I had never really faced this before, but I wrote them on UCLA letterhead, the coaches, to get access to these teams all over the country. And so parents had my information. And one of the reasons why I began to realize that this was such a vulnerable group of young people is a number of years ago, right after I had finished the project, I got a couple of letters from parents who told me that their portrait was so incredibly important to them because their son had died in Afghanistan or Iraq. And so I realized that in the same way my own community in the early 90s, in imaging them, in terms of their own vulnerability in relationship to creating history, that there was a vulnerability of a group of young men that I wasn't even really thinking about in relationship to making it. And it's always so interesting when you make work how it changes in time in relationship to how time moves things forward in different ways. So after doing extreme kind of masculinity in that way, I kind of wanted to get back to a group of really cool dykes. And so I started photographing just my friends who still identified really as butch and thinking about butch identity and what that meant not only for myself but my own community. And so this is Eileen Miles, Harry Dodge, Idexa, And for the first time, I'm going inside and outside. So they're both like photographs constructed within the landscape as well, the studio. This is Jessie. And there's a body of work that you won't, again, see here because you can't see all the work, called Children Portraits. And Jessie was photographed with her shirt off at the age of 8 or 9. And so I reposed her with the same color background and revisited her as a young butch. Pigpen. Lindsay. And then with it, I went into the archive from 1982 to the present, and I printed black and white, like 2 1/4 shots of friends. So this is Daphne. Pigpen. Pigpen's hand. Marussia. Angela. Much younger me. Melissa. I had always thought that this work was a little bit too close to Mapplethorpe to a certain extent in terms of format. And so it took me years to kind of dig into that archive to bring it forth again. The political landscapes are really going out in the middle of these moments of political rallies. So this is the Immigration March, and really interested in the way that the American flag is used from both immigration to then portraying an anti-war march to a Tea Party rally. So going to all of these different kind of segments throughout America that were rallying at the time. And I still am trying to work up the nerve to go to a Trump rally, but I'm so worried about just doing that for some reason. I don't know why. If I can go to a Tea Party rally, I'm staying away from a Trump rally, but I guess it's just some things you can't put yourself in. The inauguration of Obama. Again, Obama's inauguration. A rally against Prop 8, against gay marriage. Michigan Women's Music Festival. I know, Mishfest. I know. Mishfest tents. The same summer I went to Mishfest, I also went to the Boy Scout Jamboree, which was the 100th anniversary. Because again, I'm interested in binaries, right? So this is the tents at the Jamboree versus the tents at Mishfest, right? Which tent would you rather be in? Yeah. So, also Boy Scout Jamboree. And then the Women's March. And so this series is ongoing. And then a lot of you saw 700 Names. I'm going to get cut off fast. So I'm just going to tell the story and go through the images really fast so that you can see the rest of the work. Elizabeth Taylor and I have the same accountant, or had the same accountant because she's passed. And for years my accountant would say, well, do you want to do anything with Elizabeth Taylor? And I would say, well, I don't know, Derek. I don't really do celebrity. These are her closets, by the way. I don't really know what I would want to do. And then, he would revisit it with me and say, well, have you thought of something? And I had just finished making Inauguration and doing that book, so I was heavily thinking about Eggleston, and I was thinking about Eggleston's photographs of Graceland. And I said, yeah, if Elizabeth will give me permission to make a portrait of her through her home and her belongings, that's the kind of portrait I want to do of Elizabeth Taylor. So I went to Elizabeth's house, and she looked at all my work, and I never met her, but through her personal assistant, she granted the permission to go ahead and make the body of work. So I brought back, with Inauguration and another portfolio called the O Portfolio, I brought back this old school photography thing, which is like the photography portfolio. So the portfolio contained 50 images, and it's the way that I wanted to kind of put the work together, because it's like these days in the art world, I just feel like it's important to be somewhat generous. Instead of buying one image, why not get 50? And I also love like that. So it's, hand stamped with a rubber stamp. It's like really like for those photo curators out there, you know what I'm talking about in terms of bringing a little old school dialogue to it. You can see the rubber stamp mark right there. And it also was easier than signing 50 photographs for each portfolio. So she granted me permission, and I spent 3 months in the house while she was still living, and then she suddenly passed away. And then I continued the body of work for another 3 months in the house. And then it was the only body of work that I've ever had to sign a confidentiality agreement. And so the lawyers had to come and look at all the work, the trustees of the estate, and grant me permission to use the work. And so it was a really kind of fascinating way of thinking about, again, what is iconic. And this is one of the most iconic movie stars of my generation, my mother's generation. And to end up being able to make probably more of an intimate portrait of her in this way was fascinating versus having her just sit for me. I fell in love with Fang. That's Fang with the Chanel shoes. I asked for the cat after Elizabeth passed, thinking maybe Fang and I get along. Maybe they'll give me the cat. No, the cat went to somebody else, but that's okay. And this is her office. Her jewelry. Bedside table was an image I really had to fight for. And it was the fact that they were like, but why, Kathy? The dog-eared remote control manual, just like it could be such a pretty photograph without that. And I'm like, no, that's what's human about it. She dog-eared her remote control manual because none of us know how to use these damn remote controls. And it just really, I needed that, I needed and wanted that kind of personal touch where you almost could feel the fabrics, that it had a real sensibility of what was private with her. And then this is the jewelry getting packed in a paper sack the last day at the house, and Christie's took it all away for sale. And this is an installation of it from Mocha. So portraits and landscapes I'm still working on this. I haven't stopped this body of work. I don't know if there'll be an end to it because I really got into the black and the shapes and again, thinking about history painting and kind of creating allegories, which is not what I normally do. And I call this my menopausal body of work. And so it's like at this point in time, I'm going through menopause. I'm thinking about photography and how much I kind of hate photography at this moment in time. And whether or not am even a really good photographer anymore, or what does that even mean? And trying to make things about memory and ethereal and space so that if people go to national parks and they jump out and they take a photograph on their phone and then they post it immediately, have they really experienced it? Like, what is it about longing? What is our relationship to longing and pausing and holding and being held and kind of all of these larger questions I think I started to ask as I'm aging. And so this is Oliver and his mouse, Mrs. Nibbles. And so I saw a Da Vinci exhibition in London as well as a Richter exhibition at the Tate. And I began to kind of form this body of work in relationship to that experience of being with those works and what is a masterpiece and what is it to photograph these artists like Lawrence Weiner who one day won't be around and who I love and who I have the best conversations with. And again, being able to hold somebody with a portrait and keep your attention to the portrait. This is the Rodarte sisters, Kate and Laura, embroidering a blood drip. So a lot of the things with women had like the idea of blood in it. This is an abstract from another national park. All of these are untitled because I really like the kind of mystery within what you're looking at. Then I started making these ovals because I was thinking about cameos and oversized cameos. And I'm actually making cameos right now with a jewelry designer. And I just started thinking, why does it have to be a rectangle or a square? Like I want to make another shape. And I wanted to, again, with working at the idea of history and painting, it felt really natural to begin to make these oversized ovals. So you have Mary Kelly as a tease of taking her hair down, right? Because anybody who knows Mary knows that she always has her hair up. And so there's, again, these different moments of allegory that happens within the portraits. Jonathan Franzen reading War and Peace. Ron. And the landscapes in between the portraits are those pauses. The portraits are in themselves are so intense and demanding and detailed. It's like, what is it to go into this more ethereal space? And that has a lot to do with just longing for me. And the other thing about the abstract landscapes is also at the time that I started making it, how popular abstract photography was. And I taught for years with James Welling, kind of like the master of abstraction in photography. And I just decided to make abstract photographs by just racking the focus of my lens so that it would still be a lens-based practice versus a materiality practice. So this is just an installation shot from the Hammer Museum, which is this beautiful room called the Vault there. Rick Owens. These I made in London. I set up a studio for a week in London. Michelle LeMay. Gillian Waring. It was so interesting to do a portrait of Gillian because she wears masks for her own work. So to like try to make a portrait of Gillian. Isaac Julian. David Hockney. And then my London abstract image, which I'll tell you what it is. It's Cliffs of Dover. So I'll end on this body of work because it's the last body of work and I have 5 more minutes, so we'll work on this. So the piece that I'm showing, if any of you have a chance to go to New York in November 1st it opens, it'll show at Lehmann Maupin. But I opened this piece last January at Regen Projects, and it's a film that I made called The Modernist that's in conversation with Chris Marker's 1962 film La Jetée. So it's all black and white photographs, and the protagonist, the character Pigpen, who plays the lead role, starts like kind of pinning up these Julius Shulman modernist photographs in his room, and it's all about longing again. So this piece is about longing, the politics of our time. So he's pinning them up. He lives in one room of his studio, so he's working and living in this one room. It's about the haves and the have-nots, the idea of reflection in the mirror, and that's also the reflection of modernism to a certain extent. How has utopia or the utopic dream failed us to a certain extent? Has modernist actually failed us in relationship to affordable living? So I just started riffing on this, and these are stills from the film. But the character, you know, it's very quiet. There's people that you'll see like at Ralph's supermarket as he's buying flowers, but otherwise for 22 minutes you follow this character in silence where the film is made up of all black and white stills. So there's over 852 images, and it's all shot just with one camera. So the character starts like dealing with newspapers and collaging over the modernist houses. So here you have both fake news and real news, because you'll see cause unknown at global art dealer Larry Gagosian A. Quincy Jones' house. So I was making this before Trump actually won, so that you have the real news of the day. But then I ended up printing fake news of the character begins to burn down some of the most iconic modernist houses of LA. So here he is at the Chemisphere spreading gasoline, which is really just water. And then you see him beginning to draw and collage the Chemisphere photographs. So you're seeing art being made in relationship to me making this film as well. It's kind of, I call it the piece that I made that it's like all my thoughts and the kitchen sink I threw into this. And then here's a clip of it so that you can kind of get an idea how the photographs move. So with the installation, you're still looking at some stills. You would walk into, let me get to the theater. So you would walk into the installation and you'll see a really large color photograph that I kind of consider the map of the piece, which is the final image of the collage that Pigpen made through the course of making the Modernist. And then I had a fantastic architect in LA by the name of Michael Maltzin design the theater. And so it has this kind of rose-colored reflective surface over it, and it kind of mirrors almost a Kaufman house, or the idea of what a modernist house would look like. So that was built, the theater was built in the middle of the gallery. And then with it, instead of verticals, I didn't want it to be, I didn't want horizontals, I didn't want still lives from the film. So at the same time I was shooting the piece, I was also shooting verticals because I knew that I wanted this kind of framing of idea of like a portrait position in relationship to how I would surround the gallery with specific images from the piece, but that they remained separate from the piece. And so when you went into the theater, there were just like 3 simple benches, and then you would watch the 22-minute film. And then this is the wall facing the opening of the theater, so you have this sequence of Pigpen looking in the mirror. And then a reflection of the back wall held all these photographs of his hand holding matches. And then the vitrine, another portfolio box. So in this little room you had like just pieces out of the collage work. And whoops, let me go back because then it ends. And so one of the things is like, you know, it's a film, but I had to make it also a piece. So it's a portfolio box that has images and letterpress in it. And then the character always uses one brand of matches called the Swan matches. And so you open up the box of matches and there's one match and the thumb drive with the film on it that comes in this portfolio box. So that's what I've made recently, and now I'm working on other stuff. But thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions. There's mics up here. Please feel free to just come up and ask a question. Yes, sir.
Can you talk about your process in making a portrait? How is there a give and take? Do you know what you're coming in looking for? Do you talk to the person you're photographing?
Yeah, I think that's a good question because I think that I mean, obviously I teach photography, so I'm always telling my students, well, you've got to talk to them, you've got to direct them. And I'm a fairly controlling person when people sit for me. So I'm moving hands and fingers and like looking at shapes as well as just positioning them. And I work really, really fast because I think it's really horrible for people to sit for portraits. I know when I'm sitting for a portrait, I don't really like it that much. So I try to get it done within 20 to 30 minutes. I try not to go past that. Even when I was shooting 4:5, I was doing it that way. So in my studio, I have a permanent black corner up so that if people are coming through town, I can grab them and do a portrait of them. But then I have all the other colored seamlesses too that I still kind of work on. But I'm pretty much stuck in this idea of the void right now with the black. But they have to be very formal. I'm interested in them being incredibly formal. So, but yeah, I'm controlling.
Hi, I'm going to ask a very broad question. What ways, or what are you interested in seeing from other LGBTQ artists?
Oh yeah, that is a broad question. I mean, bring it on, right? Everybody should be making work as much as they want in terms of representing their own communities. And I think that one of the things that I was so fearful of when I started making my work, because I wasn't exhibiting at the time that I started the portraits and the self-portraits, and I remember saying to myself, well, I'm fucked. You know, I'm not going to get a teaching job. Like, this is like my whole ambition was always to teach, and that's why I got my master's degree. And you know, when you're a photographer and you're growing up in the 70s and 80s, you don't really think about exhibiting work, to tell you the truth. Like, photography was this, I mean, the picture generation helped us a lot, but you didn't really, like, being a documentary photographer, you didn't think that you were going to actually end up anywhere. And so I remember making the early work and just saying, well, the work is too important for me to make, and therefore I'm not going to censor myself. And I think that's the most important thing that I can tell people, is that our own internal homophobia and censorship and the permission that we give ourselves in relationship to ideas of visibility is unbelievably limited because of homophobia and what it has done in relationship to our society. So be brave. Because it all worked out for me, so, you know, I'm happy about that. I still get to teach and so forth. Haven't been kicked out of too many places.
Kind of jumping off of that, how have you balanced teaching with making, you've made an immense amount of work in your career, so how have you balanced getting funding for that and teaching? Was it a tough road at any point, or?
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was going up to San Francisco, I could only afford 10 sheets of 4x5 film for each person. So I had to get it, you know? And traveling across country in an RV, like a mom's friend bought me the RV, and I made landscapes for her that she donated to a museum in Miami for me to pay for that. Once I started actually selling work, it became better for me to fund my work. But I've won some grants. I haven't won a lot. I've won some cash awards, but not a lot. So teaching full-time has always allowed me to kind of make whatever I wanted to within my practice, which is really important. Because I think if you're a selling, exhibiting artist, it's hard not to rely on what you sells really well. Like, you kind of go like, wow, that was great, man. Good payday on that one. And then you don't really want to go back there because you don't want to be that person that begins to only make work that you feel is sellable. So the teaching has helped keep me out of that. In terms of galleries, I've never had them give me an advance. I don't believe in getting advances. I think some artists really need it, but I've always tried to keep it really tight. And then I guess I'm good at balancing my time. I always tell my students, it's like after you get out of school, make sure you schedule making your work, because you no longer have to make work. So you have to be passionate enough to continue your practice. And that is making dates for yourself in your date book, literally. I sometimes don't have any ideas, and I'm just like, oh man, I don't have any ideas. And then I'm just like, okay, well, just pick up your camera and go wander and see what it says to you. It's like Louisiana doing high school football. I had no idea it was going to offer all these things, but I knew that I was going to be in Louisiana for 10 days bored. So it's like I would just ended up finding something that ended up being interesting for myself. So I think you have to be willing to really explore and schedule that time for yourself. And it's not really that easy, to tell you the truth, but if you're passionate and you really believe in what you're trying to do, then you're able to manage it somehow.
Hi, I was just wondering what you thought of more, recent, like, pop culture references with, like, queerness. Like, I know, like, I think to, like, Call Me By Your Name and, like, even, like, Jennifer's Body, and just how, like, me watching those kind of, like, influenced me or, like, made me think in certain ways. I was wondering if you had any, like, thoughts on those, like, in general, or just, like, thoughts on those
I mean, it's
things.
interesting because I have a 16-year-old son, so he's like obsessed with RuPaul Drag Race, right? He like loves it so much. It's like, and it's funny because I won't watch it with him, and it really upsets him. He's like, come on, Mom, this is like your peeps. Like, you know these people. Like, why are you not watching this with me? And I'm like, well, they're mean to each other, and I just don't do meanness. I just don't do catty meanness. And so it's you know, it's funny because I think that my son is so much more interested in the idea of pop culture and queerness than I am. And I think maybe that's because I am a 57-year-old woman that didn't have pop culture references. I mean, it was like when Ellen came out, that was the big thing for us, you know? And then the L word was completely disappointing for us. And so it's like my pop culture references are so like very different because they were never, they're never quite right for how I would like it to be, I guess. And so I have a conflicting relationship with it, to tell you the truth. Because my son just like, it's like drives me, he's like, really, you're not gonna even just watch the show with Mama Juju and I? And I'm like, no, I don't like the meanness. I'm sorry, honey, I just can't do the meanness. I said, I can do the meanness when we're all in queer clubs together. Like that was okay for me. But for the public display of it, it switched something for me. So I don't know if that answers your question very well. Okay.
Hi, so I've got a question in terms of, you mentioned something earlier in reference to your portrait dyke, and it's, you said, what does it mean to wear one's identity on the body? And I really want to hear your answer to that question in both, like the goods and the bads, and like how it is for you.
Well, it's complicated. I mean, I think that it would be nice if somebody actually wrote an article that didn't start with, in 1990, as a leather dyke, she'd made this. And so one of the things about making work in relationship to your identity and making powerful work in relationship to your identity is there's no escaping that, which I'm fine with, actually. I don't have a problem with it. But I also just wonder, how can somebody actually write about it in a more evolved way, so to speak, you know, that it really is about the structure of community and what is identity and the specificity of identity. But in saying that, I wouldn't take away any of the work that I've made. I can't live with pervert. I could live with self-portrait cutting on my back, but I don't. I actually don't have any photographs of mine hanging in the house. But I think that, you know, it's interesting because I have different collectors in my life who come up to me and they're like, oh, I wake up to you every morning, I have pervert hanging in my bedroom. And I'm thinking like, wow, like maybe you're braver than me because I couldn't wake up to that every morning, you know? And so identity is a really complicated thing. And I think in terms of ideas of really beginning to create representation and the importance of that, there's also a slippery slope to it. And I worry about the idea of how much people need to protect themselves but also be visible. And how do we navigate that kind of gap in terms of one's own self-preservation as well as being open in society? And where do we end up going with that? And how are our stories, you know, being able to be told? And so it's a good question, but it's really complicated as well in relationship to what we surround ourselves with in relationship to creating ideas around representation.
Yes, thank you so much.
Sure. Oh, hey.
Why did you even get the job?
Oh, what was the question?
Why did I what?
Why did you get the job?
Oh, well, I guess people thought I was pretty good at what I was doing. So I got a job because people said, oh, like, you're pretty good. I think that's why I got the job.
Sorry, I thought he had a different question.
Okay. No, you don't want to ask it?
He had wondered how much the book sold for.
Oh. Pretty good right now. It's another thing, I guess, you know, I think we should all talk about this because I think that in art school that you don't really think about selling work and it's like a taboo, right? It's like gallery representation and that kind of thing is a little bit of a taboo, but I mean, it also allows you to continue to make your work. The work ranges from 7,000 to 65,000, depending on what bodies of work.
he was interested in the names in the book.
Which book?
The Elizabeth Taylor.
Oh, well, there's
yeah.
the portfolio.
Oh, the portfolio. Yeah.
Or did you want to know how much that sold for?
Yeah, that's what he was
Oh,
interested in.
yeah, that was 120,000 for the portfolio, but 50 photographs.
Right. Thank you.
So, yeah.
So whenever looking...
But the gallery gets half, you guys. You have to remember that. And then the other 30% goes to taxes. So if you ever do sell your work, like, make sure that you put it away for the IRS, because otherwise you get screwed.
Hey, so whenever I'm looking at photographic portraits, I'm always wondering how the photographer goes about approaching the subject to make them feel comfortable and natural. So I'm wondering if you have any conscious techniques that you do.
Yeah, I think the hardest one for them to look really natural and within themselves was high school football. And so because the guys would be lined up right after practice. And so I would be doing like 4 to 5 shots of each person, and they were all catcalling each other, you know, and it was really hard to get them to be with me. And so I'm really interested in trying to actually, I don't ever believe that portraits are necessarily an essential aspect of the person that you're portraying, but that it's a shared moment. And so to try to get in a shared moment, there's different things that I do. With them, I would ask them, think about your favorite touchdown or football play that you've ever done. I try to get them in their own head, so they're not thinking about me. Like when I recently just made a photograph of Aggie Gunn, and I said to her, I want you to think about your grandchildren. You know, and so then all of a sudden you become unaware of the camera and you're in your own head, and you can kind of watch how people's facial expressions. I also tell people to breathe. Breathing is really important. I'm like, okay, take a deep breath, let it go, shake it out, or I'll tell them to shake it out. I don't know why I ended up with that one. But it's just like where you're not like really getting a good portrait because they're so utterly aware of you and what a portrait means. And so I try to get it so where they're really comfortable, and then doing it really fast helps. Like I did a portrait of Thelma and Durrell recently, which is, I think, a really phenomenal portrait. I didn't show it to you tonight. And I remember Thelma Golden going home saying, like, oh, God, Kathy was so fast. Like before I knew it, we were done. And I think that is nice for people too, that it's just like, you're not wearing them out with your own idea of what's coming. You kind of accept what's before you and you tweak it a little bit.
Hi. I was wondering if you ever feel like as an artist you couldn't approach or like fully pursue a certain project because of your identity, or do you feel like any artist should really be able to cover any topic that they want to talk about?
Well, once I opened the box, then it's just like, okay, here I go. No, I don't think that there's anything that I haven't made that I question myself about. I question whether or not certain things are good enough. There's bodies of work I don't like that are out there in the world, and then it's like, oh, you know, like the Beverly Hills and Bel Air houses have always been weird for me, because even though they're formally really interesting when you're before the print, because they're 40 by 60 and the scale and the 8 by 10 camera does all of that in print form, when you like show them, they just look like bad real estate photographs of houses. And so there's different things that you end up arguing with yourself on an aesthetic level in relationship to how you're making work. But you also have to realize that hopefully, if you're lucky, you get a long life, and there's going to be things that trip you up here and there. And it's good to question. And I always tell my students that your failures are as important as your successes, because I think you actually learn more from your failures. Like I learned a hell of a lot out of those houses. I was just like, oh, they're showing, and I don't even know if I like them.
Thank you.
So.
Hey.
Hey.
So my question, you were talking about those archive like pictures that you kept because it kind of looked like Robert Mapplethorpe.
Wait, say again.
Those like archive of pictures you kept because you were like, oh, this reminds me of Mapplethorpe, and
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to show them. And currently, as photographers, we live in this age of kind of needing to share everything because of Instagram and social
Yeah.
media. How important is it now for photographers to keep work, even if it's work that they're just kind of like, oh, this looks like this person, but I need to share it because it's what is socially obligated to do now?
Well, as an academic and not quite a hoarder, I believe that archives and building archives of your ideas are important because even if they are not public, they end up informing you in relationship to your life, and photography does that so incredibly well. I was being interviewed the other day, and this guy was going through my archives because there are racks in my studios of just boxes and boxes of prints. And he picked up a little box and he goes, this one says memories and thoughts. What's in that box? And I'm like, well, I don't know, but let's open it up and see. And then it was like, well, these are memories and thoughts from 1982. So this is what I was thinking about in 1982. This box is from that period of time. So it was kind of nice for me to go into it because what I found in it was in 1982 in San Francisco, I was actually doing high school football as well. So I had forgotten that I had actually done all of these portraits of high school football players in the early 80s when I was a student at SFAI. And then all of a sudden, there I was a box that was almost, that reminded me that it was actually not something that I had just thought of in 2006, but that it was something that I had thought about a long time ago as well. And so I think archives are important because if they might not inform the public, but they definitely inform you as an artist in terms of your own practice.
Thank you.
I just have like a technical question that's been kind of bothering my mind. For the self-portrait where you carved on your back, did you do that or did you have somebody else do it? And if you did, like, how?
No, I didn't cut. I didn't do any of the cuttings or any of the needlework on myself for Pervert either. A
Okay.
good friend and artist friend, Judy Bamber, did the cutting on my back. And I wanted somebody within the leather community to do it because I wanted that cutting to be very apprehensive. Where Pervert was done by an expert, Raylan Galena, who is an amazing body artist who unfortunately passed from breast cancer. But she did Pervert, and that's why to this day it's like this, it's a perfect scar. But self-portrait cutting on my back wasn't made to continue to exist. It was made just within a moment, and I wanted the kind of tentativeness of it. So no, I didn't actually do, I set up the camera and I framed it, but my good friend Connie Samaras pulled the dark slides of the sheet film to do self-portrait cutting on my back. And then Pervert, my girlfriend at the time, put the dark slides in and pulled it when I told her to kind of make those pictures.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello. I
Hi.
was wondering if you ever considered taking the film that you made and like putting the prints out in a format not like a screen being shown, but more so like a book or an exhibition.
Oh yeah, because Chris Marker did do that with La Jetée. There's 800 some images, so I don't know. Nobody has asked me to make it, and maybe one day after the film has a life, maybe a book would come out. But the pacing is so important in relationship to the piece that you wouldn't have the same kind of pacing in a book. And so one of the things is like just the kind of beat of the film and what I pause on and what I move through. And then the film has one sound in it right in the middle of it, and that sound is super crucial. And so La Jetée, Chris Marker has this moment where the memory of the lover's eyes open and meets the camera. And so I didn't want to do a movement because Chris Marker's film is a film. Mine is basically images making a film. And so I used, instead of the eye opening, I used the strike of a match right in the middle. That with the theater I built had all of these speakers, so it unsettles you. So you end up being from a passive viewer to an active viewer. And I'm really interested in that idea of activating the audience and what it does to take to activate an audience. So a book wouldn't have the same feeling of going into a theater.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question when it comes to finding subject matter. So with the body of work, including a bunch of different couples scattered about the United States, are those found by chance or by knowing people or just running into them? Just how do you
Running
gather your
in,
subjects?
knowing people, asking people who I want to think about, and recently it's been like photographing Lawrence Weiner and John Baldessari and David Hockney and Aggie Gunn, are all these people that have been in my life since I was in my 20s. There's a lot for me in terms of like kind of looking and honoring people that have gone through my life, and this last body of work on Black are all, for the most part, are creative people, whether in fashion, writing, or art. And then some people I don't know, you know, like the surfers I didn't know, the football players I didn't know. I'm more comfortable with people that I know, but I think that doing editorial photography for so many years, and I do it much less now because it's just so hard for me to travel, it really teaches you a lot about how to make sure that you go home and you have what you got. And then lately I've been toying around, or I've had different fashion companies. I did a whole campaign for Louis Vuitton, and I just did a campaign for Balenciaga. And it's super weird doing that. I don't even know if I like that, but it's nice paycheck. Keeps the studio going. But it's interesting, like those different kind of genres, and I think it's so hard as an artist when you're so in your own head and making what you want to make to end up having to make something in relationship to a job. But I think it makes you, in some ways, for me, it made me a little bit faster and better as an artist by taking those kinds of jobs.
Thank you.
Okay, you guys are the last two questions, you two that have come forward. And I want everybody to know, amazingly enough, there are actually a few copies of the Nemes Road book, which is not $120,000. It's only $60. Nicholas was able to get a few copies of that are out in the lobby. So there are some to be had. Last two questions.
Hi. You seem to have such a clear definition of who you are and the themes in the work you make, and I'm just wondering, did you start out with those, and how did you find them if you didn't start out with them, and how did they develop?
Well, I think that I have a lot of questions that I'm trying to answer. I'm an incredibly curious person. And so I think that that's always the great basis of like kind of making work or thinking about work is, I think being an artist is, you know, a fairly solipsistic life, so to speak. You know, it can be trapped in kind of narcissism and other things that aren't so great to have in your wheelhouse as an artist. But I think the idea of what it is I want to communicate as a human being within my lifetime, and the importance of communication, especially in terms of making images, is just something that I've been passionate about ever since I was a kid. And so I kind of can't stop myself from that place of being utterly curious and wondering how to begin to visualize the more kind of in-depth existential or philosophical questions that I want to think about in terms of living as a complicated person in this country that I've grown up in.
Hi, I'm super short. So I think, so my question is sort of around the creation of the work. So in creating identity-based work, I can't imagine that you have to sort of like be like, oh, what am I going to make work about? But rather I can imagine that it's just a part of your life and sort of like a self-exploration.
Mm-hmm.
And so my question is, how do you, like, what are the lines between, I think, okay, so the question is, how do you decide what to share and what do you archive as like, this is not something, because I can't imagine that everything is shared, right? And what stories are like,
Yeah.
how do you essentially like go through and choose what is shared publicly versus the images that you create that explore your identity and answer some of these questions, but
Yeah,
you're not comfortable
the
sharing?
snapshots on my camera aren't shared. Like the snapshots on my phone aren't shared. I mean, I share on Facebook a little bit here and there, but like I kind of suck at social media. But I think it's a really interesting question. And I think it's an important question we all need to ask, because you're really asking about the kind of ethical lines that are drawn in relationship to making images that are both personal and political. And where are those ethical lines, and how do you traverse it? And I think it's complicated because those lines change as history changes and life moves on. I've never taken photographs without permission, except for when I was a street photographer, and as well as the political rallies. But street photography, in my mind, like that, it has its own kind of set of interesting issues in terms of ethics. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in Europe in relationship to the new privacy laws, in terms of, well, where is that history in terms of the street. So the street has always been separate from my friends, but I've never put a photograph out there that, that's not true. I got sued. I put one photograph out there, and I was asked to remove it from an exhibition in a show at the ICA in Boston, and I removed it. And it was from Michigan Women's Music Festival. And I had permission, because that was the rule of the land. But there were women in it that ended up in the photograph too, because I fell too in love with the image, that they sued me to remove the image from the museum. And so I did.
So I think
And so that was an ethical line that I actually crossed.
Yeah.
Because I was in love with that image. And then I got really like in trouble. I mean, I had to lawyer up. And it was interesting because my argument, I settled outside and said, no, I'll never show this image again. But it was interesting because my argument was that if you have a no photography policy, then you have to have an absolute no camera policy on the land, because everybody at that point in time was also sharing all the photographs from MishFest in terms of social media. So this one image, which I thought was an incredibly loving image, ended up being removed. And that was the one point in time that I've ever had anybody actually object to any of my images.
So thank you for that. I think the part of the sort of like the weeding out that I'm referring to is sort of the comfort level, right? So in presenting work that's super personal, so I guess my question is like the comfort level of how much you share, and then the tokenization as like, I mean, like Mapplethorpe was the gay photographer, right?
Right.
Nan Golden was like the person taking pictures of this like drugged out queer scene, and then there's your work, and like these are the dykes, right? And so I think like my question is, how do you navigate what you share, and then how like this identity, you stated that the pervert is now like the Wikipedia, this is like Catherine Opie.
Yeah.
Like that is the image that shows up. So how have you
Not
navigated?
anymore, I won my wiki war.
Yeah. Yeah. But like, how do you navigate like the comfort of like what you share, and then how the world then views you, but then...
Yeah, it is such a tough question, because it really has to come from yourself in terms of your own comfort level. So when I made Pervert, you know, as I said, I wasn't exhibiting a whole lot at that point. I was a little bit in alternative spaces. But when I made Pervert, I literally had to go home down to San Diego, Poway, and show my mom and my dad and tell them that they needed to know about this part of me, that they knew I was a lesbian, but they didn't know how involved in the leather community I was or had been, because that was private, that was personal. And all of a sudden, this very intense self-portrait's going to hang in the Whitney Museum of American Art. So I had to go home and have a second coming out to my parents. And it was hard. It was really tough. I mean, they didn't disown me or do other things that other parents do, but my mom had a really hard time with it. And, you know, and it was interesting because when I hung at the Guggenheim, Mom came to the opening, and Mom was standing before it, and a couple friends asked, like, wow, how is this for you? Like, having this picture of your daughter up there. And Mom was like, it's tough, but I'm happy that she's so brave. So they're really personal questions that you're asking. I mean, I think there is a line of ethics involved in relationship to photography, but what you put out there, you know, it could potentially live with you for the rest of your life. So you do have to feel comfortable with deciding to do that. And that is only something one's own psyche and person can answer for themselves. Because, you know, there's moments that it takes a toll. And you have to decide whether or not you're willing to do that. And I think that it's a really important question to ask oneself. And I don't know if I would have asked, it's to this day, I don't know if I would have made the self-portraits that I made with the kind of public persona that I ended up being in the art world. I can't tell you that for sure I would have done it. And then that kind of makes me sad too. Like, that's like really sad. And so it's a really difficult question, but it's a really good question, and I thank you for it.